At her sister's wedding, Clara Belle wasn't given a toast, a dress, or even a seat at the main table, just a tray of lemonade and a list of chores. She moved carefully along the gravel path that wrapped around the Belle Country Inn, her hands steady beneath the weight of a wooden tray lined with dripping mason jars. It was nearly golden hour, and the Tennessee light caught in the glasses like candle flames. Clara's boots crunched with each step, coated in the dust of a morning spent trimming hedges and wrestling with tangled garlands the wind had knocked loose. Guests milled across the lawn in soft florals and tailored jackets, sipping sweet tea and laughing at stories Clara couldn't hear. The reception tent stood like a crown jewel at the center of it all, draped in twinkle lights and festooned with burlap bows and wildflower bundles, Victoria's dream wedding, pulled straight from a Southern bridal magazine. A breeze fluttered the edges of the white linen tablecloths, carrying with it the scent of pecan pie and the faintest trace of muscadine wine. Clara shifted the tray against her hip and stole a glance toward the trellis arch where Victoria stood, framed in rose petals and smug approval. Their mother was beside her, pinching the sleeve of the bride's dress, fussing over some invisible wrinkle. Victoria's laugh rang out, crisp as glass. Their father looked on, arms crossed, pleased as ever. Clara returned her gaze to the gravel, dodging a guest who stepped backward with a paper plate. No one noticed her. That was the point. Inside the main tent, she placed the tray on the drink table, aligning the jars by eye. Her fingers were stiff and tinged faintly red from lemon juice. A fresh pitcher needed mixing, but before she could reach for it, a sharp voice pierced the air. Clara. Lord have mercy, not those boots again. Susan Bell stepped briskly from the side flap, her expression a mask of forced calm. People are taking photos, sweetheart. Can you not ruin them with dirt? I'll stay by the back, Clara said quickly, brushing her hands on her apron. Do, her mother sniffed. And pull your hair back properly. As Susan turned away, Clara caught her reflection in the pitcher's chrome side, flyaway curls, a freckled nose, and cheeks smudged faintly with dust. She didn't look like a bridesmaid. She looked like part of the waitstaff. She slipped around the tent edge, moving toward the greenhouse out back. Vines had overtaken its frame, but sunlight still kissed the glass in patches. Clara paused at the door, pressing her fingertips to the wood. The lock was rusted, but the space inside called to her, the dusty pots, the broken benches, the silence that remembered her better than her family ever had. She peered inside, eyes following the light across abandoned seed trays and faded hand tools. One day, she whispered, maybe this place will remember me. A polite cough behind her broke the moment. Well now, that's a sad thing to hear on a wedding day, said Mrs. Adeline, stepping lightly down the path in her cardigan and pearls. She held a small jar wrapped in a checkered napkin. I brought you some preserves, darlin'. Peach. Still warm from the stove. Clara managed a smile. Thank you, ma'am. The older woman touched her arm gently. You've always had good hands, Clara. Strong, like roots. Don't let anyone make you think you don't matter just because you're not the one wearing white. Clara blinked back the sting behind her eyes. I'll try. Adeline said, slipping away down the path. That sister of yours sure got the show, but I've always liked the girl who cleans up afterward. Clara held the jar to her chest for a moment before slipping it into her apron pocket and returning to the tent. She avoided eye contact as she passed guests nibbling mini quiches and snapping photos. Near the head table, Victoria lifted her champagne flute. I just want to thank everyone, she said brightly. To my husband, my friends, my wonderful stylist, and of course, to my parents. None of this would be possible without their love and support. The crowd clinked glasses. Clara stood by the punch bowl, still holding the empty tray. Her chest tightened. Her name was not spoken. She wasn't surprised. Later, as guests lined up for biscuits and gravy, a woman pointed toward Clara. And who's that girl serving biscuits? Susan didn't even look up. Oh, just Clara. The words landed like a pebble in Clara's stomach. Not angry. Just tired. She stepped away from the table, letting the tray drop gently onto a side shelf. The stars were coming out, visible even through the party lights. Music played, something acoustic and soft. She moved toward the fringe of the tent, closer to the lawn's edge, trying to breathe. That's when she saw him. An elderly man in a beige suit stood a few feet away, one hand resting on a cane, the other adjusting his glasses. He looked around, puzzled, as if searching for something beyond the tents and tables. He turned to Clara, his voice low and calm. "Miss, would you mind helping me find the guest house?" He was sitting beneath the oak tree by the gravel path, his hands shaking, face pale, forgotten in the middle of a celebration. Clara spotted him from across the yard as she was collecting used dessert plates from the cocktail tables near the barn wall. Most of the guests had drifted back toward the tent, drawn by music and the open bar. But just past the rose trellis, beneath the oldest oak on the property, the man in the beige suit looked like he'd been placed there and forgotten. His shoulders slumped, and his cane lay on the ground beside him, half hidden in fallen leaves. She hesitated. It wasn't her job, technically. The catering company had sent 3 servers. But they were laughing near the back, tossing forks into a bin with more volume than accuracy. Clara placed the stack of plates on the cart and crossed the lawn. As she neared, she noticed the slight tremor in the man's hand as he reached for a handkerchief, missing his pocket. "Sir," she said softly, slowing to a crouch in front of him. "Are you feeling all right?" The man looked up slowly, blinking behind round glasses. His skin was damp with sweat despite the coolness of the evening. "Got a little turned around," he said, voice low and polite. "Didn't want to bother anyone." "You're not a bother." She gently took his wrist, checking the coolness of his pulse without a word. "Let's get you some water." She stood and scanned the area. A few yards away, Tommy, young, alert, always watching, was stacking napkins near the drinks table. Clara waved him over. "Tommy, cold water and maybe a granola bar, please?" Tommy nodded and ran without a word. Clara returned her gaze to the man, who now seemed more embarrassed than ill. "Wedding excitement," he said with a weak smile. "Bit too much for these old bones, I suppose." Clara knelt again and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're not the only one feeling out of place." He looked at her closely now. "You're not part of the bridal party, are you?" She shook her head. "No, sir. I'm the girl they ask when they've run out of hands." He chuckled, a dry sound. "That's a hard kind of useful. Not many notice it." Tommy returned with a bottle of water, cool from the cooler, and an unopened granola bar. Clara thanked him and twisted the cap off for the man, who took small sips, breathing easier with each swallow. They sat together in the quiet. Clara tucked her legs under her skirt and brushed a few leaves from the hem. She pulled a blanket from the cart nearby, used earlier for photos under the arbor, and draped it gently over the man's shoulders. "What's your name, sir?" she asked. "Walter," he said. "Walter Harris." "Nice to meet you, Mr. Harris." His gaze lingered on her hands as she adjusted the corners of the blanket. "You work with your hands?" She nodded. "I like plants. Soil. Quiet things. Things that grow when no one's watching." His expression softened. "Gardens. Greenhouses, mostly. Though I haven't had one of my own in a while." "I used to believe in buildings," he murmured. "Glass, concrete, commerce. But lately, gardens make more sense." They sat a moment longer, letting the rustle of leaves fill the silence. Clara tucked a small brown leaf behind her ear without thinking. Walter smiled at the gesture. "Most people rush past those who fall behind," he said, voice firmer now. "You didn't." Clara blinked, surprised by the weight of his tone. Before she could answer, he reached for his cane, now recovered by Tommy, and stood slowly. Clara steadied him. He looked at her again, longer this time. "What's your name?" he asked, more seriously than before. "Clara Bell." He nodded, his hand warm as he shook hers gently. "That's a name I won't forget." The wedding was over. The streamers were taken down, the tables folded away, but Clara was still cleaning. Sunlight filtered through the thinning branches of the sycamores, casting long shadows across the dew-speckled lawn. The chairs had been stacked and the white tent folded like an exhausted performer. In the stillness of the morning, only the faint sound of a cardinal echoed between the empty flower barrels. Clara moved slowly across the backyard, a straw broom in hand, sweeping fallen petals into a pile near the trellis. She stopped beside a forgotten bouquet lying on the grass, yellow zinnias and half-wilted bachelor's buttons tied loosely in twine. She picked it up, brushing away a leaf, and turned it over in her hands. "Funny," she murmured, "the ones left behind are always the wildest." She carried the bouquet to the edge of the lawn, where the path curved past the herb garden and toward the greenhouse. The old structure had stood there since Clara was a child, its wooden frame soft with age and its glass panels smudged with time. Vines curled up the sides like cautious fingers. No one used it anymore. Victoria said it made the property look messy in photos. Clara reached for the rusted latch and opened the door gently. It creaked in protest, swinging open just wide enough to let in the breeze and her careful footsteps. Inside, the scent of earth and memory lingered. Dust hung in the golden light like whispers. She set the bouquet on an old table, then began sweeping. The bristles kicked up a swirl of dirt and dry petals. She moved slowly, not out of weariness, but reverence. Each corner held something, a cracked pot, a folded tarp, a forgotten watering can. She found her grandmother's stool tucked under a bench, the same one she used to sit on when teaching Clara about seedlings. Clara wiped it off and sat for a moment, running her fingers over the grooves carved by time and weather. Outside, footsteps crunched on the gravel. Tommy appeared at the door, a pair of gardening gloves tucked into his back pocket. "Need a hand?" Clara looked up, surprised, but smiled. "Only if you don't mind dust." "I don't mind dust," he said. "I mind boredom." He stepped inside, picking up a spade with the air of someone who understood tools better than people. Together, they cleared the cobwebs, rinsed the pots, and organized the seed trays into neat stacks. Tommy worked quietly, glancing now and then at Clara like he was waiting for her to speak. She broke the silence as she folded a fraying burlap sack. "You ever think about what you'd plant if you had your own space?" Tommy shrugged. "Tomatoes, maybe. Something useful." Clara nodded, then hesitated. "I'd build something, not just useful. Healing. A garden that helps people slow down, breathe, remember. A place for grief and hope and memory to live together." He looked at her more directly now. "Like therapy?" "Like a place that doesn't ask questions," she said. "Just offers shade." Tommy didn't say anything, but he smiled. The morning wore on, light shifting from amber to clear. They took a break under the awning, sipping from an old thermos Clara had filled with tea. The wind rustled the ivy along the greenhouse frame. Then, from the side gate, Mrs. Adeline appeared with a paper bag in her usual soft stride. "Figured you two were getting into trouble," she said. "So I brought backup." Clara stood to greet her, brushing her hands against her apron. Adeline handed her a glass bottle of sweet tea and a folded flyer. "Found this on the bulletin board at the post office," she said. "Thought of you immediately." Clara opened the page slowly. The header was neat and serifed, the Harris Foundation for Environmental Healing, seeking young visionaries in eco-design. Her eyes drifted lower to the logo stamped in gold foil, a simple, elegant leaf, curved gently at the tip. It was the same shape that had gleamed on Walter's lapel pin. Clara unfolded the flyer slowly. Her eyes locked on the logo, a golden leaf, the same as on Walter's lapel pin. Clara wasn't expecting mail, just a quiet Monday morning with muddy boots and a cracked flower pot. The wind had a sharper edge than it did last week. Leaves swirled along the gravel walk like little rust-colored dancers, and the sycamores out front had started their annual shedding in earnest. Clara tucked a curl behind her ear as she bent to collect shards of terracotta from the side of the greenhouse. A gust had knocked the hanging pot down overnight, and now her hands were stained with damp soil and the scent of rosemary. The air held a hush, the kind that lingered after weddings, after music and lights and people had all packed up and gone home. Tommy was out helping his uncle patch the chicken fence, and the inn was mercifully quiet. Clara had hoped to spend the day reorganizing her notes on perennials, maybe planting the trays of lavender she'd been nursing on the windowsill. She wasn't thinking of Walter Harris. Not exactly. But when she'd brushed the dust off her grandmother's pruning shears that morning, his voice had surfaced. "That's a name I won't forget." She'd almost laughed. People forgot her name all the time. The clatter of the mailbox startled her. She glanced up just in time to see the postman's truck disappear behind the row of poplars. Wiping her hands on her apron, Clara made her way to the porch. Bills, a catalog, something for Victoria even though she didn't live here anymore. And then, one envelope that didn't match the rest. Cream-colored. Heavy. Embossed in gold, the Harris Foundation for Environmental Healing. Clara stood still for a moment, staring at the seal. Then, without a word, she sat on the porch step and slid her finger beneath the flap. Dear Miss Clara Bell, it is with great pleasure that we invite you to submit a formal proposal to our Young Visionaries initiative. Your dedication to restorative landscaping and community gardening aligns beautifully with our mission. She read it twice before she breathed. Then again, slower. The words blurred around the edges, not from emotion but disbelief. Inside the house, her mother was folding napkins at the dining table. Clara walked in, holding the envelope like it might break. Mail came, she said quietly. Susan looked up, half interested. Anything for your sister? No. Just this. She handed her the letter. Susan skimmed it and set it down beside the centerpiece. Oh, a gardening contest. That's cute. Frank, seated nearby with a cup of coffee and the morning paper, added, Is there a prize? Like a gift card to the nursery? Clara said nothing. She picked the letter back up and returned to the greenhouse. That afternoon, she sat with her sketchpad propped against her knees, staring at the empty page. Then she drew a single leaf. Then a pathway. Then a shaded bench nestled beside a low fountain. Shapes became spaces. Memory seeped into the margins. The memory garden would have walking trails shaped like the lines of a fingerprint, unique, winding, impossible to trace back perfectly. Native flowers would bloom year-round, even in grief. There would be a section for solitude, another for healing conversations. Everything would grow, even in silence. Tommy showed up just before dusk with a ham sandwich and a grin. Adeline says if you don't eat something, your brain's gonna sprout weeds. Clara smiled and took the sandwich, setting her pencil down. It's starting to look like something, she said. Smells like dirt and hope in here, he replied, leaning over to study the sketch. Later, Mrs. Adeline stopped by with a thermos of black coffee. The strong kind, she said. Tastes like the past. They sat together on the bench outside the greenhouse, sipping in silence. The moon had started its slow climb over the hills, and Clara's page was now filled with more than lines, it held vision. After the sun dipped, she lit the small desk lamp in the corner and worked through the night. Ink smudged the edges of her sleeves. Her fingers cramped and her back ached, but her heart beat with purpose. She didn't stop to question it. Not once. Just as she finished the last blueprint, a knock came. It's Walter Harris, in person, holding a thick envelope and smiling softly. Clara's hands shook as she placed the blue folder on the polished oak table. It wasn't nerves, it was everything. The town hall smelled faintly of old books and pine cleaner. Clara stood in line behind a high schooler presenting a composting club and a middle-aged man with a hydroponic lettuce model. Tables lined the community room, each trimmed in crepe paper and topped with displays, miniature garden models, poster boards with leaf-printed headers, baskets of hand-grown herbs. Clara's table had none of that. Just the folder. And a small sprig of rosemary clipped from her greenhouse. Thanksgiving decorations were taped to the windows, turkeys made from construction paper, fall leaves laminated and hung on string. It made the room feel less like a contest and more like a school fair. Clara swallowed hard and stepped forward. Miss Bell, the chairperson said, smiling politely. You're next. She opened the folder with steady fingers and began. The memory garden would be a space for healing, she explained, where grief had room to breathe beside beauty. She spoke softly but clearly, outlining the concentric paths designed for wandering reflection, the use of native plants that thrived in Tennessee soil, the water feature meant to soothe rather than decorate. She referenced veterans returning home, children who'd lost a parent, those who carried quiet grief with no name. The panel nodded as she spoke. One woman jotted something. Another adjusted her glasses. Walter Harris, seated at the end of the table in a tan wool coat, watched her with a faint smile. His hands rested calmly on the cane across his lap. "I don't have degrees or titles," Clara said near the end. "But I have dirt under my nails and a lifetime of listening to what people don't say. That's what this garden is for." Silence settled gently when she finished. Then the committee chair nodded. "Thank you, Miss Bell. We'll be in touch." Clara gathered her folder and moved away. As she stepped down the side aisle, someone brushed past her. Well, Victoria said, her voice bright and sugar-laced. "Didn't think I'd see you here, Clara." Clara turned slowly. Victoria. Her sister wore a camel-colored trench coat and heels that didn't suit the linoleum floor. Her husband stood just behind her, looking mildly amused. "Still playing in the dirt?" Victoria asked. "I always thought you'd grow out of that." Clara said nothing, just walked on. She passed Tommy in the hallway, he gave her a thumbs up without words. That night, she returned to the inn to find her parents sitting at the dining room table, sorting through boxes marked storage. The air smelled faintly of turkey broth and dryer sheets. "What are you doing?" she asked, seeing a familiar sketch tumble from a folder. Susan barely looked up. "Cleaning out some clutter." "That's not clutter," Clara said, stepping forward. "That's my proposal." Frank set down his coffee. "Clara, you've been very caught up in this gardening thing. We didn't think it was serious." She reached into the box, pulling out her blue folder, now smudged with fingerprints and creased at the edges. "You taught me to serve," she said, voice low. "I just learned how to serve differently." Susan opened her mouth, then closed it again. Clara turned and walked out. Later that evening, as she sat in the greenhouse nursing a cup of coffee from her thermos, Mrs. Adeline arrived with a slice of sweet potato pie and a soft smile. "Thanksgiving's next week," she said, setting the plate on the bench. "If things get lonely, I set an extra plate every year." Clara managed a grateful smile, but her eyes stayed fixed on the sketchpad in her lap. When the evening had faded into true night and the house lights had gone dim, she returned to the greenhouse alone. She lit the lamp, pulled her coat tighter, and began adjusting the plant layout again. Hours passed in the quiet hum of pencil and thought. Then a soft sound at the door. A letter slides under her greenhouse door that night. The gold seal gleams under the porch light. People came, young, old, quiet, curious. They didn't ask about Clara's family. They just came for peace. The sun had risen gently over Pinebrook, casting a soft blush across the early blooms that dotted the newly opened community garden. Crocuses swayed beside daffodils in tidy, crescent-shaped beds. The air smelled of damp mulch and the faint tang of fresh cider from the folding table near the entrance. Rows of white chairs, slightly uneven on the grass, filled slowly as townspeople arrived, many holding paper cups, some with small children trailing behind. Clara stood at the garden's edge, adjusting the knot of her apron. Her name, Clara Bell, had been embroidered in sage green thread across the chest, a quiet gift from Mrs. Adeline wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. She ran her fingers over the stitches once, then let her hands fall to her sides. Tommy was already directing guests toward their seats, pointing out where the apple cider was warmest and where the compost demonstration would be held later. He wore a new button-up shirt but still had dirt under his fingernails. At the front of the aisle, beneath an archway woven from twigs and pale fabric, Walter Harris stood with his cane planted firmly beside him. He was dressed in a dark wool coat and a tweed cap, his expression as calm as the garden itself. When the mayor stepped aside and handed him the microphone, Walter cleared his throat softly. "Not long ago," he began, "I found myself lost at a wedding, overlooked and struggling. Most people rushed past." He paused, letting the hush settle. But a young woman stopped. Not to impress. Not to fix. Just to help. He looked out over the guests, many now still and leaning slightly forward. That's the woman we're here to honor today, he said. Clara Bell. The recipient of this year's Harris Visionary Award, not for building the biggest garden, but for planting something deeper. Something that will outlive all of us. Applause rose gently, then swelled. Clara walked forward, her boots brushing along the gravel path she had laid stone by stone. When she reached Walter, he handed her a small wooden plaque. She took it with both hands, then turned to face the crowd. I don't have much to say, she said quietly. Only that this garden was built by more than me. By every kind word I didn't forget. By people who believed in something quiet and growing. She turned slightly to look at Mrs. Adeline in the front row, Tommy beside her, grinning. Thank you for making room for that. From the back, Susan and Frank stood close together, unspeaking. Victoria stood off to the side, her arms crossed loosely. Clara met none of their eyes. When the ceremony ended, people began wandering through the paths, trailing fingers along lavender stems, admiring the circular benches carved from old oak. Children darted between bushes, giggling, while older guests found comfort in shaded corners and stories. Clara moved quietly, accepting congratulations with gentle nods. Near the apple trees, Victoria approached. Her voice was low, not sharp as it once had been. You really did all this. Clara met her sister's eyes without flinching. And I did it without needing to be the bride. Victoria opened her mouth, then shut it again. She gave a small nod and stepped back into the crowd. Later, as the sky turned the soft gray of late afternoon, Clara stood near the center of the garden beside the lavender bed. The mayor approached, his tie loosened, a warm cider in hand. He extended his free hand. Would you consider designing a healing park downtown? In a quiet corner of Pinebrook, a garden now grows where judgment once bloomed. Clara never asked for applause, yet her compassion took root in the hearts of strangers and blossomed into something far-reaching. Kindness, when given freely and without expectation, has a quiet way of circling back, sometimes through the hands of those we least expect. Like a bench in the shade or a flower growing through sidewalk cracks, it waits patiently to be noticed. If this story stirred something gentle in you, perhaps today is a good day to look twice at someone the world tends to overlook.